When God says wait, it isn't silence, it's a summons to war in the unseen. And if you're truly listening, you'll notice that everything begins to shift, not around you, but within you, because God never tells you to wait, unless what's coming has eternal weight. And the moment heaven says, not yet, hell begins to whisper, never, and this is where the test begins. Not of your circumstances, but of your posture, your patience, and your perception. Because when God presses pause, the enemy presses lies, and suddenly you're not just battling time. You're battling torment, you're battling discouragement that disguises itself as logic. You're battling weariness that masquerades as wisdom. You're battling the temptation to settle for something that looks like God's will but lacks God's weight. And the longer you sit in the waiting room of your destiny, the louder the counterfeit calls become. But here's what no one tells you when God says wait. He is not withholding your breakthrough. He is expanding your soul to hold it, because some blessings are too holy to be poured into a fractured vessel. And waiting is where God heals the cracks you've ignored for years. It's where He shows you that you've tied your identity to outcomes, your worth to speed, and your faith to results, and one by one, He begins to cut the invisible chains that tied you to performance, to people-pleasing, to control. And you start to feel like you're being emptied. But the truth is, you're being purified. Because waiting is not just a season, it's a scalpel in God's hands, a sanctifying fire disguised as silence. And if you let it do its work, it will sever every soul tie that has diluted your calling. And while you're begging God to open the next door, He's rearranging the furniture of your heart so you can actually carry the weight of the assignment behind it. Because if He gave you the platform now, it would crush you, not crown you. And if He brought you the promise now, it would expose you, not elevate you. And that's why the first thing that happens when God says wait is a holy discontent. Not to run, but to root, because He's anchoring you in the truth. That delay is not denial, and pain is not punishment, it's preparation. And in this stretching, you'll notice your appetite changes. Things that once excited you now exhaust you. People who once had influence now drain you. And you'll start craving solitude, not out of sadness, but out of sanctification, because the Spirit is detoxing your soul from all the noise that made you confuse momentum with maturity. And here's the shocking part. The longer you wait, the more heaven speaks in whispers, because God isn't interested in shouting over your distractions. He wants to train your ear to recognize His voice in the quiet. And that's why it starts to feel like He's gone silent, right when you need Him most. But in truth, He's drawing you into deeper dependency, into secret place intimacy, where the word becomes more than comfort, it becomes command. And suddenly, scriptures like Isaiah 40:31 don't just sound poetic, they become prophetic. Those who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength, not those who whine, not those who worry, not those who walk away, but those who wait. And you begin to understand that waiting isn't passive. It's prophetic obedience, it's militant stillness. It's standing in the middle of fire and saying, even if nothing changes, I will not bow. And in that defiant devotion, God begins to reveal the hidden things, the pride you didn't see, the fear you've spiritualized, the idols you've baptized in ministry language. And as those things come to the surface, the battle intensifies, because the second thing that happens when God says wait is exposure. Not of others, but of you, because the fire that delays also refines. And God is too good to take you into the next season with unhealed motives and undealt wounds. And so you'll find yourself in relational pruning, in unexpected losses, in divine disconnections that don't make sense. And you'll want to fight it to cling to fix, but the Spirit will keep whispering release, because the people who walked with you in one season may not be anointed for the next. And when you ignore that voice, it feels like dragging corpses into places meant for resurrection, and you wonder why you're tired, why the favor feels blocked. But God isn't punishing you. He's pruning you for clarity, for purity, for precision. And this is where the wilderness starts to feel like home, because you're not being punished, you're being protected from entering the promise with parasites. And you'll begin to hear God say things like, trust me when it makes no sense, and walk away even if it's comfortable, and be still when everything screams run. And every time you obey in the dark, you build an altar in the unseen. And angels are dispatched not when you move, but when you yield, because Psalm 27:14 wasn't written for weak moments, it was written for warriors. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord, and this courage isn't a feeling. It's a decision to remain planted when you'd rather flee, to stay obedient when there's no applause, to keep your hands open when you want to clench. And this is where you realize that waiting births warriors not because they fight, but because they've been forged. And once you've been forged, the third thing that happens is revelation. Not of the next step, but of your real strength, your real identity, your real source. And in that moment, you stop asking God when and start asking, how do you want to use me in this wait? And suddenly the waiting becomes a weapon, the delay becomes a dance, the silence becomes a sanctuary, and you begin to thank God for not answering too soon, for not opening the door before your character could carry it, for not releasing you until you were truly free. Because freedom isn't walking out of something. It's becoming someone who can never be trapped by it again. And the wait did that. The wait delivered you. The wait exposed you. And now the wait is awakening, something terrifying in hell and glorious in heaven, a believer who cannot be bribed, rushed, or deceived out of their calling. And that is exactly who you're becoming. Because what most people don't realize is that the wait doesn't just test your trust. It transforms your target. It peels your heart away from what you thought you wanted and aligns it with what heaven actually assigned to you. And slowly but surely, your prayers start to shift from God, bless what I'm doing, to God, break what's not. And that shift is dangerous to darkness. Because the fourth thing that happens when God says wait is you start losing your taste for what once distracted you. You no longer chase validation because you've discovered visitation, and you no longer crave platforms because you've tasted presence, and you realize that the greatest thing God gave you in this delay wasn't what you were waiting for. It was who you were becoming while you waited. Because heaven measures success by surrender, not speed. And once you've surrendered the idol of urgency, the pressure to perform dies too. And this is when the enemy starts to panic, not because of what you're doing, but because of what you're not reacting to anymore. You're not triggered by silence, not shaken by rejection, not seduced by shortcuts. And that kind of peace terrifies hell because it proves that your faith has moved from feeling to foundation, from circumstance to covenant, from moment to eternity. And that's where power begins to rise. Not the kind that needs to be seen, but the kind that moves mountains in secret, that shifts atmospheres with whispers, that breaks generational cycles with one obedient pause. And this is why waiting becomes a weapon. Because while others run ahead into noise, you've been sharpened in silence, and that silence has become sacred. And you've stopped asking for signs and started seeking His face. And that is when heaven begins to move. Because James 1:4 wasn't written for cute journals. It's the call to crucify your timeline. Let patience have its perfect work, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking nothing. And that perfection isn't performance, it's purification. And when you let patience do its work, God begins to unveil the final sign of waiting, divine release. And this isn't just the lifting of delay, it's the unleashing of authority, because now you're not waiting out of fear, you're moving out of fire. And when God finally says go, you won't just walk, you'll roar. Not from excitement, but from endurance, from every silent night. You didn't quit from every unanswered prayer. You still believe through from every closed door you chose to worship in front of. Because the most powerful person in the room is the one who's been told no by God and still stayed on their knees. And now the enemy can't use time against you. Because you've stopped seeing delay as rejection and started seeing it as refinement. And now doors don't impress you because you know who opens them, and platforms don't intoxicate you because you know where the real altar is, and opportunities don't own you because you're not moved by momentum, you're moved by mandate. And that's when the earth begins to shift. Because God doesn't release people into destiny until they can no longer be defined by anything except His voice. And that's what waiting did. It stripped you, sifted you, sanctified you, and strengthened you to the point where you can say, even if He makes me wait again, I'll still worship. And that kind of worship can't be manipulated, can't be copied, can't be commercialized, because it was birthed in fire and proven in stillness. And so here's the warning. When God says, wait, don't waste the wilderness. Don't curse the silence. Don't abort the altar. Let it undo you. Let it expose you. Let it build you until everything that could be shaken has been. Until what you thought was a delay becomes the greatest display of God's faithfulness in your life. Because Romans 8:28 doesn't say all things are good. It says all things work together for good. And waiting is the thread God uses to sow glory into your story. And if you're in that season right now, if everything feels slow, silent, or stuck, don't you dare believe the lie that nothing is happening. Because in the spirit, chains are breaking, roots are deepening, heaven is watching, and something eternal is being forged inside you. And when the time comes, when the scroll is opened and the season shifts, you'll realize that what God was preparing wasn't the promise, it was you, and now you're ready, not because everything looks perfect, but because you no longer need it to, and that is when God moves.